Jeffrey Dahmer, the horrors inside apartment 213. They say the neighbors noticed the smell first, something strange coming from apartment 213. At first, it was faint, like spoiled meat or maybe something rotting in the trash. But it never went away. It clung to the hallway like it had teeth. People complained, maintenance checked, and every time the guy in 213 had an excuse. "Oh, my freezer broke. I had some bad meat go off. It's just the fish." He said it with a straight face, calm, polite. Nobody thought much of it. Just a quiet man, kept to himself, didn't cause trouble, until the day he did. His name was Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer, but most people just called him Jeff. He had the kind of face you wouldn't look at twice, soft-spoken, glasses, quiet, seemed like the kind of guy who might help you carry groceries. The kind of guy who wouldn't hurt a fly. That's the thing, though. He didn't hurt flies. He went after people, real people, living, breathing, trusting people. And he did it behind the door of apartment 213. But the story didn't start there. It started long before, years earlier in a quiet neighborhood in Ohio. Jeff was a strange kid, smart but distant, liked to collect roadkill. No one really asked why. He said he just wanted to see what was inside. He'd dissect dead animals in the woods behind his house, frogs, raccoons, even a dog once. He told one kid at school that he wanted to dissolve a cat in acid. They thought he was joking, but he wasn't. By the time he was in high school, Jeff had already learned how to pretend, how to smile just enough to pass, how to keep the darkness tucked away behind a soft voice and quiet nods. He drank a lot, started early, hid bottles in his locker. Teachers noticed, but back then people didn't really press. "He's just going through something," they'd say. "Give him space." After school, he joined the Army. It didn't last. He was discharged for drinking too much, wandered from job to job. No real plan, no friends, just shadows. And then he started killing. His first victim was Stephen Hicks. Jeff picked him up on the side of the road in 1978. They went back to his house, had a few drinks. When Stephen said he wanted to leave, Jeff didn't let him. He hit him with a dumbbell, then strangled him, then dismembered him, just like that. And then Jeff buried the pieces in the backyard. Later, he'd dig them up, crush the bones, and scatter them in the woods like dust. After that, there was silence. No one found out. No one suspected. Jeff disappeared into the crowd again. But he didn't stop thinking about it. The feeling, the power, the control, it haunted him, and he wanted it back. Years later, he moved to Milwaukee. That's where things got worse. Much worse. He got an apartment. Apartment 213. Cheap, small, nothing fancy. Just four walls and secrets. He started bringing men back there. Most of them were young. Most of them were Black, Asian, or Latino. That wasn't a coincidence. Jeff later admitted he targeted people who were less likely to be missed. That's what he said. Less likely to be missed. Inside that apartment, he did things no human should ever do. He drugged them, strangled them, kept their bodies for days, took photos, kept souvenirs, skulls, hands, even hearts. Sometimes he ate them. He said it made him feel close to them, like they'd never leave him. It wasn't just about killing. It was about keeping. Neighbors heard things, saws, screams, but they told themselves it couldn't be what it sounded like. Not from him. Not Jeff. The guy who offered you a soda in the hallway. The guy who just looked lonely. One woman, Glenda Cleveland, tried to raise the alarm. She saw something. A boy, naked, bleeding, stumbling out of Dahmer's apartment. She called the police. So did others. And you know what happened? The police showed up. Jeff told them it was just a lover's spat, said the boy was drunk, that it was nothing. And the cops, two grown men with badges and training, they walked that boy right back into apartment 213, right back into the monster's hands, and that boy never came out again. Jeff kept going, victim after victim, 13, 14, 15, 17 men in total, and no one stopped him, until one day, one of them got away. His name was Tracy Edwards. He was supposed to be victim 18. Jeff lured him in, like the others, promised him cash, drinks, maybe some photos. But something felt off. Jeff was twitchy. The vibe was cold. Then Jeff pulled out the cuffs. Tracy fought, ran, barefoot, handcuffed, panicked. He flagged down a police car. That's how it ended. Cops walked into apartment 213 that night expecting to find a crazy story. What they found was worse than anything they'd ever seen. A human head in the fridge, a heart on the counter, a freezer full of limbs, drawers with Polaroids. Dozens of them. Pictures of dead men, pictures of what Jeff did to them. Step by step, like instructions, like trophies. And in the back of a closet, skulls, bleached, labeled. It wasn't just murder, it was a museum. That was the night the world found out who Jeffrey Dahmer really was. Not a quiet guy, not a neighbor, not a name, a nightmare, a walking graveyard. And the horror had a number, apartment 213. The moment those cops stepped into apartment 213, everything changed. You could feel it in the air, like the room itself had been holding its breath for years. One officer walked in first, a little skeptical, probably expecting a petty drug bust or some guy acting weird. He didn't expect the smell. No one ever did. It hit him like a wall, thick, wet, sour. Something that stuck to your tongue, your clothes, your memory. You don't forget that kind of smell. That's not garbage. That's death. Tracy Edwards was still outside, handcuffed, scared out of his mind, yelling about how he'd been nearly killed. So the officer kept going. In the back, he saw a drawer, opened it, found photographs, not selfies, not party shots, pictures of dead men, dozens of them, posed, arranged, dissected. At first, the officer thought it had to be fake, some kind of horror movie props, but then he looked closer. The skin was real, the blood was fresh, the terror was documented. He called for backup, fast. Within minutes, the apartment was crawling with cops, detectives, and soon, forensic teams. Word spread fast, like wildfire laced with gasoline. People from the building gathered in the hallway. Some tried to peek inside, others threw up. One woman fainted. It didn't feel real. They found a head in the fridge, neatly wrapped, like leftovers. A heart and some other organs in the freezer, bones under the bed, a 57-gallon drum in the corner full of acid and what used to be bodies. Skull fragments in the closet, a full skeleton carefully cleaned, laid out like it belonged in a museum. On the walls, more photos, some framed, some taped, some fresh, some old, and all of them told the same story. This wasn't random. This was obsession, ritual, collection. Jeffrey Dahmer sat quietly while they searched. He didn't scream. He didn't fight. He just watched them go through his secrets like someone watching their house get robbed. Calm, detached, almost bored. And when they finally cuffed him, he didn't beg. He didn't lie. He just said, "For what I did, I should be dead." That night, they brought him into the station. And that's when the confessions started. He talked for hours, days. He told them everything, every single name he could remember, every trick he used, every moment, every bone. He described the smell, the feeling, the urges, how he wanted control, how he didn't want them to leave. "I didn't kill them because I hated them," he said. "I killed them because I wanted them to stay." He told them how he tried to make zombies. That's what he called them. He'd drill into their skulls, pour acid inside, trying to keep them alive but under his control. Some lived for hours like that. Others died instantly. It didn't matter. It never worked. But he kept trying. The public didn't know what to do with any of it. The media exploded. Headlines screamed his name. Photos of victims were plastered across every screen. Interviews ran on loop. Milwaukee became ground zero for one of the darkest stories America had ever seen. And the worst part? No one saw it coming, because he didn't look like a monster. He looked like a guy you might pass at the grocery store. He had a job, worked at a chocolate factory of all places. He took the bus, bought beer, paid rent. He was invisible in plain sight, and that scared people more than the crimes. People started digging, looking at the system, at how many times Dahmer could have been stopped and wasn't. That incident with the boy, Konarak phone, the one who escaped bleeding, dazed. People couldn't believe what happened. 2 women saw him, called 911, told the cops something was wrong. But when the cops arrived, Dahmer convinced them it was just a lover's fight. "My boyfriend's drunk," he said. "He's fine. I'll take care of him." The boy was only 14, couldn't even speak English. The cops laughed, gave the boy back, even joked about it over the radio later. A month after that, Konarak was dead. So the anger came. People were furious. Protests, lawsuits. The 2 officers were suspended, then reinstated. The city tried to explain it all away, but the damage was done. It wasn't just about Jeffrey Dahmer anymore. It was about the blind spots, the racism, the homophobia, the fact that most of Dahmer's victims were young men of color, people the system already didn't protect. And Dahmer knew that. He said it himself. They were the ones who wouldn't be missed. That line haunted the city. The trial began in 1992. The courtroom was packed. Families of victims sat shoulder to shoulder with reporters, lawyers, and people who just wanted to see what a real-life monster looked like. Dahmer pled guilty. 15 counts of murder. He didn't deny it. Didn't try to plead insanity, at least not in the way most expected. He said he was sick, but he also knew what he did was wrong. His lawyers tried to argue mental illness. The prosecution said he was cold, calculating, evil. The jury believed the latter. He was sentenced to 15 life terms, 957 years in prison. But he didn't last that long. In 1994, 2 years into his sentence, Jeffrey Dahmer was beaten to death in prison. Another inmate, Christopher Scarver, attacked him with a metal bar in a gym shower. Dahmer died from massive head trauma. Some called it justice. Others said it was too easy. Either way, the story of Jeffrey Dahmer ended the same way he lived, quietly and with blood. But even in death, his legacy stuck around. Books, documentaries, news specials, dramatized shows. Apartment 213 was demolished. The entire building was torn down. The ground left empty. They didn't want anything to grow there. They wanted it forgotten. But you can't forget Jeffrey Dahmer. You can't unsee what they found in that apartment. You can't pretend he didn't walk through the world wearing a mask so convincing. Even the people closest to him never saw what was underneath. And maybe that's the scariest part. That monsters don't always hide in the dark. Sometimes they live right next door. People always wonder the same thing when they hear the name Jeffrey Dahmer. They ask, how? How did this go on for so long? How did no one stop it? And most of all, how could someone do what he did? Calmly, methodically, like it was just a part of his day? But the thing about Dahmer wasn't just what he did. It was how normal he made it look. He wasn't wild. He didn't rant or rave. He didn't have a swastika tattooed on his chest or rage boiling out of his mouth. Number. He looked like the guy who refilled the coffee pot at work, the one who always said thank you, the one who nodded when you passed him in the hallway. And that's what made him more terrifying than any knife or scream ever could. In the years after his arrest, people tried to dissect him like he dissected so many others. Reporters, psychologists, authors, they all wanted to figure out what was broken inside him. Was it his childhood? His parents' divorce? The fact that his dad taught him how to bleach animal bones when he was a kid? Was it his alcoholism? His loneliness? His confusion about his sexuality? Some said yes, others said no. Some said he was born this way, others said he was built by years of being ignored, misunderstood, and never held accountable. Dahmer himself didn't even seem sure. In interviews from prison, He talked like he was outside of himself, like he was watching someone else tell the story. He said he felt remorse, that if he could take it back, he would, that he wished there was a way to make it right. But he also admitted that he kept doing it even when he knew it was wrong, that he felt a pull, a hunger, and gave in. He said the worst part was when he tried to stop and realized he couldn't. It was like an addiction, he told one reporter. The killing, the keeping of body parts. It became a part of me. There was no rage in his voice when he said it, no tears, just a soft, matter-of-fact tone, like someone explaining how they quit smoking or why they don't like mushrooms. That's what shook people the most, not the words, the way he said them. Back in Milwaukee, people still struggled with the aftermath. The city had been branded, not by choice, as the place where a nightmare lived behind one door. Families of the victims tried to move on. But how do you move on from something like that? Some of them never even got their son's full remains. Just fragments, teeth, photos. Others got nothing. Just a name on a list, and a promise that the rest was too far gone. One of the most haunting scenes happened during Dahmer's trial. A woman named Rita Isbell, the sister of one of his victims, stood in court, shaking, fists clenched, voice cracking, and screamed at him. She screamed years' worth of pain in front of the world. "I don't ever want to see your face again," she shouted. "I'll kill you." And in that moment, every raw, buried wound cracked open. People didn't see a courtroom anymore. They saw a funeral that never got to happen, a goodbye that was stolen. That clip went viral decades later when it was reenacted in a TV show. And when the real Rita saw it, she said she never gave them permission, never agreed to be turned into a scene for people to binge watch with popcorn. That's the problem with stories like this. The world turns real grief into episodes. Serial killers become Netflix hits. Victims become trivia. And still, people ask, why do we keep coming back to Dahmer? Maybe it's because there was no monster mask to rip off. He didn't hide in shadows. He didn't laugh like a comic book villain. He went to work, bought beer, smiled, then went home and did things most of us can't even speak out loud. Or maybe it's because he showed us something we're all afraid to admit, that evil doesn't always announce itself. It doesn't always wear fangs. Sometimes it's soft-spoken. Sometimes it says sorry when it bumps into you. Sometimes it holds the elevator and presses the button for you. Jeffrey Dahmer made the world uncomfortable because he didn't break the rules of reality. He bent them until they snapped. He made people question their instincts, their neighbors, the whole idea of safe. After his death, prison officials said he had become a model inmate, helped clean the church, was polite. He even got baptized. A minister said he wanted to turn his life around, but people didn't buy it. Not really. For them, Dahmer wasn't a man anymore. He was a scar. And yet, he's still everywhere. His name, his face, the apartment number, 213, it all lives online now. In videos, articles, reenactments. There's even merchandise, t-shirts, mugs. One time someone made cupcakes shaped like body parts for a Dahmer party. That's how twisted it gets. Horror becomes entertainment. Pain becomes profit. But go ask the families of the victims if it's just a story. Ask the people who lived in that building, who heard the drills and smelled the rot and knocked on that door wondering if they were just imagining it. Ask the cops who walked into that room and never slept the same again. This wasn't fiction. This wasn't a nightmare you wake up from. This was real. And every time we tell the story, we have to remember that. Not for Dahmer, for them. The 17th, their names, their lives, their memories. Because he took everything from them. But he doesn't get to take their story too. Years passed, but the ghost of apartment 213 never really left. The building's gone now. They tore it down not long after Dahmer's arrest, like ripping out a rotten tooth. The land just sat there after that. No buildings, no flowers, no signs. Just a patch of dirt too poisoned for anything to grow, like the ground itself didn't want to remember. But the world remembered. It still does. Because the story of Jeffrey Dahmer keeps finding its way back into conversations, headlines, screens, even now. After the trial ended and the cameras moved on, Milwaukee tried to breathe again, but it didn't feel the same. Something about knowing that evil had lived right next door, that it had blended in and gone unnoticed for so long. It shook people. It made them look at their neighbors differently. It made them question silence. The city didn't just lose 17 lives, it lost its sense of safety. And then came the copycats. People started writing Dahmer letters in prison, fans mostly. Some sent money, others sent pictures. One woman even asked to marry him. He never replied to most of them, but he read every word. It's like people forgot what he actually did. Or worse, they didn't care. They just wanted to be near the story. That dark, cold story that made everyone shiver but still stare. TV shows came next. Books, documentaries, movies. They all wanted to understand Dahmer. Some told the story respectfully, others didn't. Some painted him like a lost boy, some like a monster. Either way, he kept showing up, his face on thumbnails, his name in titles, his voice in interviews. And slowly, something weird happened. People started remembering Jeffrey Dahmer more than they remembered his victims. That's the part no one likes to talk about. The victims became footnotes, blurred faces, names rattled off too fast, erased by the shock value of bones and freezers and that haunting photo of the fridge. But they were real. Anthony, Conorak, Raymond, Errol, Tony, Joseph, Richard, Edward, Ernest, David, Curtis, Jeremiah, Oliver, Matthew, James, Stephen T. Stephen, H. Each one had a story before they walked into that apartment. Dreams, families, smiles. Some were dancers, some were students, some were just kids. One had just come out to his parents. One had snuck out because he wanted to be independent. One just wanted a bite to eat. And Jeffrey Dahmer took all of them, quietly, casually, like they were nothing more than ingredients for a sick recipe he couldn't stop cooking. And even now, when people talk about him, it's rare they say the names. They just say 17. But they weren't a number. They were people. That's the part that should be the loudest. When Dahmer was killed in prison, some people cheered. Others called it karma. But it didn't bring peace. Not really. Because his death didn't undo the pain. It didn't bring anyone back. And it didn't close the book. If anything, it made the story more permanent. Frozen in time. No resolution, no ending. Just a headline and a corpse. One of the hardest truths about the whole case is that it could have been stopped. Not once, but multiple times. The signs were there. The 911 calls. The scared neighbors. The boy who escaped and was handed back. But the system didn't listen. Or worse, it didn't care. Because the victims weren't rich. They weren't white. They weren't the kind of people who got news coverage when they went missing. Dahmer knew that. He even admitted it. He hunted people he thought no one would come looking for. And for the most part, no one did. That's the part that burns. The failure wasn't just Dahmer. It was the people who ignored the red flags. The cops who joked about the boy. The system that never treated the victims like they mattered. It's easy to call Dahmer evil. And he was. But evil doesn't work alone. It grows in silence, in gaps, in shadows that no one wants to shine a light into. Years later, a few documentaries tried to tell the victim's side. Some got it right, some didn't. But even the best ones couldn't undo what happened. Because once a person becomes part of a story like this, the world stops seeing them as human. They become the one in the photo, the boy who ran, the name on the list. That's why it matters so much to say their names out loud, to tell their stories, not just his. The families tried. Some started foundations, others stayed silent, too heartbroken to speak. One mother said every time she sees Dahmer's face on TV, it's like losing her son all over again. And yet the world keeps replaying the tape. That's why stories like this have to be told carefully. Not just for the shock, not just for the clicks, but to remind people that these were lives, not just lessons. What happened inside apartment 213 wasn't just horror. It was failure of justice, of awareness, of community. And telling the story again doesn't bring the victims back, but maybe it stops the next one. Maybe, because even now there are quiet neighbors, silent buildings, strange smells that people shrug off, people who don't want to get involved. And that's where darkness waits, not in monsters, in silence. Some stories end, they tie themselves up in a bow. The bad guy gets what's coming, the good guys move on, the world learns its lesson. But this story, the one behind the door of apartment 213, it doesn't end. Not really. Because long after Jeffrey Dahmer was gone, the damage kept breathing. The trauma didn't disappear. It didn't pack its bags and leave with his corpse. It stayed in the families, in the city, in the cracks of every building that looked the other way, and most of all, in us. The world watched a man do the unthinkable. Not once, not twice, but 17 times. And no one stopped him. That's not just horror. That's a warning. You hear Dahmer's name now, and it comes with a sort of chill. Everyone knows it. Everyone says it like they're reciting a ghost story. Oh yeah, Jeffrey Dahmer, and that was crazy. But too often it's just that. A name, a punchline, a Halloween costume, a streaming title. He becomes bigger than life, while the people he destroyed get smaller and smaller until they vanish from the conversation completely. But the truth is, every one of those victims had a voice, had a life, had people who loved them, people who will never forget what was taken, not just their sons, their brothers, their friends, but their safety, their trust, their ability to sleep through the night. That's the real legacy. People like to say Dahmer was a monster. And yeah, what he did, it's beyond comprehension. But calling him a monster almost lets us off the hook. It makes him feel like something from another planet, something outside the rules, something that couldn't happen again. But it can. It does. The next one won't look like a monster either. He'll smile. He'll blend in. He'll know how to stay quiet. And if we're not paying attention, if we're too scared, too lazy, too sure it can't happen here, he'll do it again. Because monsters don't knock. They're already inside. What makes this story so heavy, so hard to shake, is that it exposes every hole in the net. Racism, homophobia, neglect, a system that didn't care enough to look deeper, a society that brushed off the people most at risk. If even one person had believed the boy who ran out of that apartment, if one cop had taken one look past Dahmer's polite smile, 17 lives might have been saved. But that didn't happen. And now we live with that truth. Some of the families say they've forgiven Dahmer. Others never will. Some still cry every time his name trends again. Some haven't spoken about it in years. But they all have to live with it. And they don't get to turn it off when the episode ends. They don't get to walk away. This is their story too, not by choice but by survival. So why do we keep telling it? Because forgetting makes it easier for it to happen again. Because silence is what let him keep going. Because when we stop talking about things that scare us, they crawl back in. This story doesn't need to be told with glamour or gore. It needs to be told with truth, with weight, with the names of the people who mattered. Because Dahmer is dead. But the people he took? They deserve more than silence. They deserve to be remembered loud. So say their names: Stephen Hicks, Stephen Tuomi, James Doxtator, Richard Guerrero, Anthony Sears, Raymond Smith, Edward Smith, Ernest Miller, David Thomas, Curtis Straughter, Errol Lindsay, Tony Hughes, Conorak Synthesomphone, Matt Turner, Jeremiah Weinberger, Oliver Lacey, Joseph Braidhoft. 17 names, 17 lives. Not victims, people, full of dreams, full of stories we never got to hear because one man decided they didn't get to keep existing. They weren't bodies in a fridge. They weren't photos in a drawer. They weren't just part of his collection. They were loved. And that's why we tell the story. Not for the killer, for them. So the next time someone mentions Dahmer, like it's entertainment, or makes a joke, or wears a costume, or clicks play without thinking, remember what was really behind that door in apartment 213. Not just horror, not just death, but silence that let it all happen. And remember, we don't stop monsters with fear. We stop them by listening, by believing the boy who runs out bleeding, by asking questions even when they're awkward, by caring when it's easier to look away. Because evil doesn't hide under the bed. It lives in ignored knocks, in brushed-off screams, in stories no one wants to believe, and that's why we tell this one. So the door never closes again. Subscribe to Uncle Luke Tells for more stories that go past the headlines, where the truth hits harder and the silence finally breaks. Because not every horror story is fiction. Some lived right next door.